My friend Earl's girlfriend's dad owned a decent piece of land in southern Maine, covered in woods and featuring several old cabins. We, meaning me, Earl, John, and Chuck, along with our various girlfriends and buddies, planned to crash there for the summer. The house we were staying in was right at the property's edge by the road. Before we even moved in one dark evening, I was driving down the dirt path to the owner's house when something big and white shot across in front of my car, a total blur. Being in the woods, I just figured it was an albino fox and didn't think much of it. A week later, we were all settled in and having a blast. The front part of the property was pretty creepy, even though it was more open. The owner's mom had lived and died in our house years ago, and there was this old spooky Mother Mary statue in the woods. The only thing left in our house when we moved in was an antique cheetah statue, tall and skinny from the 60s, so we stuck it in the hallway corner, thinking it was cool. Things were normal for a few weeks, though some friends did try out things like LSD and salvia once or twice, alongside the usual drinking. I really don't think that had anything to do with what happened next. Slowly, things started going downhill. Earl, my buddy, developed terrible insomnia because of a toothache he couldn't afford to fix. He was barely getting an hour of sleep a night and grew super irritable. One night, John, Earl, and their friend Dawn were hanging out in the cabin. John was totally sober, always a straight edge. Earl was playing his guitar, singing some of our original tunes. John later recounted that Earl said, "Wow, man, those are awesome harmonies you're doing. Since when can you sing?" Dawn looked confused and said he wasn't singing. Earl started singing again, but then he heard the harmonies a second time and stopped. He thought he was imagining it, but John and Dawn heard them too. They put the guitar down and went to check it out. Walking through the clearing, they passed the Mother Mary statue, which briefly startled them, until they got to the road. Across the street, they saw the biggest white cat they'd ever seen, like the size of a large dog or a mountain lion. They fumbled for their phones to record it. That's when I saw them from my window and ran out to meet them. I was just as shocked as they were. This giant white bobcat was sitting on a hill across from the tire shop. It was huge, but the weirdest part was its tail. It was gross, fleshy, and way too long, like a rat's tail. Dawn picked up a rock and threw it. I swear to you, all four of us, completely sober, watched this thing stand up on its back legs and calmly walk into the woods, dragging its tail. We bolted inside. Earl, more tired than usual, tried to drink himself to sleep and succeeded. I don't even remember how John and I fell asleep. Every creak in the house freaked me out. The next morning, we woke Chuck up and scared the living daylights out of him. We were all on edge, but once the sun came out, the fun started back up, and we tried to put it behind us. Earl told me that day he was still struggling with sleep and didn't expect this whole experience to help. That night, everyone wanted a low-key evening. But then Chuck had his first and only night terror. He was awake but paralyzed, hearing growls, snarls, and screams like a cougar or bobcat, and saw a huge white mass run across his doorway. When he could finally move, he came to my room and told me. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, we moved that cheetah statue from the hallway into the cabin. For a few more weeks, nothing major happened, but we stayed on edge, and Earl was still struggling. I started researching cryptids, demons, and monsters. I finally found something in an old book about Maine urban legends. It described something called the ding-ball cougar or plonus, which just sounds better. The legend said the ding-ball cougar had a ball-shaped, hairless, fleshy last tail joint, loved human flesh, and would lure people out of their cabins at night with a human voice to crack their skulls with its tail. My heart stopped when I read that. It matched our experience so well, even though it didn't mention it walking on hind legs or being white. I kept this information to myself for a while. A few days later, Earl's insomnia reached its peak. Around 10 p.m., I heard a huge crash that sounded like someone falling down the stairs. I rushed into the hallway as Earl came out of his room, and I yelled, "What the hell was that?" Earl just put up his fists and snapped, "Shut up, man," then ran downstairs. Confused, I waited for about 20 minutes before driving to my parents' house to spend the night. I stayed there the next day, too. That night, Earl called to apologize. The crash was him kicking a chair in his room because of his tooth pain, and he thought I was yelling at him. We made up, and then he asked me something really strange. "Hey man, did you come home today at all?" I said no. He explained he was the last one out, so he locked the doors, which we've been doing for 2 weeks since all the weird stuff started. He sounded a little scared when he added, "The cheetah statue was on top of Chuck's bed. I told him not to touch it." Later that night, when I got back to the house, Chuck's room was closed. We went and took a look. The cheetah statue was standing upright in the very center of Chuck's lumpy bed. The fact that it stood so straight was impressive and totally unnatural. It wasn't leaning or anything. As soon as I touched it, it fell over. The next day, I took it and hid it in one of the old storage cabins where no one would bother looking. The thing is, the very next night, it was back in Chuck's room. His bed was neatly made, and the cheetah was placed under the blankets with its head sticking out, like it was napping. We burned the statue the next day. I wish I could say that fixed everything, but it didn't. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing white blurs in our peripheral vision, heard rustling leaves, and the occasional faint whisper of singing in the distance. At one point, the Mother Mary statue was even turned backward, no longer facing the house. I'm not sure when, but we only noticed it then. A few days later, summer was over, and we all left. We still visit different parts of the property, but steer clear of that house. We hear the odd rustle, but we don't look for colors anymore because we don't want to see that white blur. After all this, I don't know what the Plonus is, a beast, a spirit, a demon, or all of them. All I know is that Earl's tooth pain just went away, and Chuck has never had another night terror. And I know it's still out there. My friend Marv loves solitary camping to get back to nature and is also a huge gun collector. A few years back, he decided to go camping on a whim on a friend's vast property in south central Louisiana near the Kisatchie National Forest. He hiked deep into the woods to a specific clearing he liked. One late afternoon, he heard leaves crunching and twigs snapping. He thought it was an animal at first, but then he saw a man approaching through the trees. Marv is usually cautious with strangers in remote areas, but this guy set off alarm bells. First, Marv knew he was the only one with permission to be there. Second, the guy was totally unprepared for the location, wearing a white t-shirt, blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. You wouldn't expose that much skin in the woods in early fall in Louisiana due to all the bugs. Marv called out loudly, "Hey, do you need help with something?" The guy just kept walking, staring straight at him. Marv, who is normally super calm, started to get uneasy. When the guy was 10 to 15 feet away, Marv stood up and loudly declared, "Hey man, can I help you with something, or what?" The guy, looking Marv dead in the eye, clearly said, "Help me." Marv said the way he said it was creepy, like something that didn't quite know how to talk was trying to speak. The guy, still motionless, said, "Help me," again, this time more forcefully and loudly. This is when Marv noticed something truly wrong. The voice had a female timbre and sounded like a recording being played back, and the guy's lips weren't matching the words. He was just opening and closing his mouth. Marv asked what he needed help with, not daring to move. The guy, still staring, repeated, "Help me," 3 more times, slowly but not louder. Marv, completely freaked out, interrupted, "All right, you need to go now, unless you actually need my help." "Do you need my help or not?" The guy didn't miss a beat, started with the "help me" yes again, louder and more agitated, and made a move to step closer. Marv, thinking he was dealing with an unstable or dangerous person, drew his .45 semi-auto pistol and pointed it at the guy, telling him to leave. This is where it got completely wild. The guy stopped talking, went silent, and was still staring at Marv. Then, he backflipped and somersaulted into the woods, instantly vanishing. Marv said it was completely unnatural, like he was pulled by an unseen spring. The guy had appeared, repeated the same phrase, became agitated, and then fled in the most bizarre way possible after the warning shot. Marv stood there, no further movement or sound from the forest. It was like he was never there. Marv, being an unshakable guy, actually stayed in the area for 2 more nights with no other incidents. When he told friends about it, he elaborated that he was sure it was a female voice coming from the guy, like it was mimicking a lure. He still doesn't know what it wanted. He also remembered hearing what sounded like a gunshot, eerily similar to his .45, in the early morning of the first night and again on his hike back, but couldn't be sure if it was just hunters. Since then, Marv researched the Kisatchie area and found many legends about skinwalkers, mimics, and other similar creatures in Native American folklore. Many of his encounters aligned with these tales, making him a skeptic, wonder about strange, unexplainable things in remote areas. I'm an outdoorsman from Pittsburgh, and when I went to Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, it was important to have good woods nearby. My Uncle Fred lived there and owned a framing shop, which meant more land for hunting spots. Behind his log cabin, which was surrounded by woods, was my main hunting area. I built a gigantic chimney for his house using flat stones found in those woods. While scouting, I found 7 circles of large boulders, clearly very old, in the middle of the woods. They were too big to have been moved by just a few guys. It would have taken at least 10 men and some kind of pulley system. Inside the larger circles were inner circles of smaller rocks, still weighing around 300 pounds. These rock circles also formed a much larger circle around the woods. My buddy Brandon and I picked our archery spot for the first week of October. It was a perfect day with a thin layer of snow, great for spotting deer or fresh tracks. After about 2 hours in our trees, neither of us had seen anything. I just finished talking to Brandon on the radio when I saw movement to my right in a pine thicket. I saw a branch move and then 4 deer legs underneath. I readied my bow for a shot. A minute later, the legs vanished back into the thicket. I waited another minute, then saw movement again, expecting the deer to come into the open. As I drew my bow, I was stunned. Where the deer should have been, there was a man, a very strange man. This shouldn't happen. Deer would be long gone if a man were that close. I lowered my bow and grabbed my binoculars. At 35 yards, I could clearly see him. He was quite plump, with a white, ruffled, long-sleeved shirt tucked into thick canvas brown pants, which were tucked into white socks just below his knees. But where his shoes should have been, there was absolutely nothing. No feet, calves, or shins. Instead of walking, he seemed to float through the woods from right to left. His head was cocked back, chin resting on his lower neck, with a large, red, bulbous nose pointed slightly up, a snobble look. His hair was covered by a white wig, like those judges wear. His arms stayed tucked at his sides, unmoving. He never looked down, only upwards. All this happened in about 20 seconds. He came out from behind one oak tree and then disappeared behind the next, never reappearing. I told Brandon what I saw, and he immediately made fun of me, joking about a deer-human hybrid. Even though we were still hunting, I had to get down and investigate. I knew where he would have walked, and with the snow and muddy ground, I expected clear footprints. But there was nothing, not a single track from him, nor deer, nor anything. I was completely amazed. What happened later that night was just as creepy. After checking the muddy ground, I climbed back into my tree stand. Brandon, who was in a permanent stand, was going to meet me at my spot to take down my portable stand. As I was almost at the bottom, Brandon walked up. I eagerly jumped down and started explaining everything again, showing him the lack of tracks. He looked at me from mouth agape and asked, "Are you messing with me, brother?" When he saw my dead serious eyes, he realized I wasn't joking. While we talked, it got dark, a Stephen King full dark, no stars kind of night. We were in unfamiliar woods, looking for tracks. We decided to walk in a straight line to one of the roads that formed a triangle around the woods. A couple of minutes into our walk, we heard a loud, blood-curdling scream, like someone being murdered. I know all animal sounds in these woods, and this was not that. After waiting, we kept walking, not talking about what we'd heard due to anxiety. Then came another long, blood-curdling scream, closer and sounding more threatening, like a woman being attacked. We felt like we were being stalked. About 100 yards later, we found something weird in our path, clear gelatinous masses on the leaf litter. I've been in the woods my whole life, and these globs shouldn't have been there. They were like thick jello. We found a good amount of them directly in our path, as if someone had marked our route. Then another scream, even closer, with leaves rustling and twigs snapping nearby. Whatever it wasn't spooked by us or the screams. Our anxiety shot through the roof. We just wanted out. We should have hit a road by then, but we hadn't. Our flashlights were dying. As we hurried along, we started seeing pine trees. This was strange because we'd only seen pines near my stand. We stopped, feeling a sick, anxious panic, and realized we were standing in the exact spot we started from, next to a specific pine tree with a broken branch. We had walked in a circle. My tree stand was nearby, but when we tried to walk away, it wasn't there. We walked back to it and immediately found the clear trail leading directly back to my uncle's backyard. We must have somehow missed it at the start. Only 20 yards down the trail, we saw my uncle's garage light. On the last 100 yards of the trail, we found more clear gelatin blobs directly down the middle of the path, which definitely weren't there when we walked in. We heard no more screams, but a strong feeling of being watched stayed with us, even as we stepped into my uncle's yard. This was the scariest experience of my life in the woods. I have no explanation for the floating man, the screams, the globs, getting lost, or the boulder circles. I still want to go back there someday to find answers. This past October 27th, I was working my mandatory military service in Finland. Our company had a shooting camp, and I got the last guardsman shift in a heated, bunk-equipped booth with electricity and a fridge, pure luxury compared to the tents. My battle buddy and I set up shifts. He guard from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., and I'd take 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. I stayed up chatting with him, and the 4 hours flew by. No cars passed. My shift started, and my buddy went asleep. I was isolated, about 5 kilometers from our campsite. Our only communication was a radio to contact the security major. We were guarding an X-shaped junction, and everything south of the booth was off limits due to dangerous shooting and explosions. The next 4 hours felt much longer, but I enjoyed the complete silence, looking at the snow-covered roads and forests dimly lit by a single street lamp and the bright moon. It was a perfect night for ghost stories, with no wind or sound. I loved the silence and being alone, imagining scary beings in the forest. Though I didn't believe in them, every time I stepped out of the booth, I got that tingling, watched feeling, which I figured was just normal paranoia for a guardsman in the middle of nowhere. As my shift neared its end, around 3 a.m., I decided to take a whiz before waking my buddy. I walked behind the booth, doing my business, when I looked to my left, directly south of the booth. My heart stopped. Just 20 to 30 meters away, in the forest, barely lit by the street light, something was standing. It looked clearly human, but its sheer size told me it wasn't. The thing had to be at least 3 meters tall, about 10 feet. It was perfectly human-shaped, wearing long green robe-like clothing, like a sniper's ghillie suit. Its face was pale, but I couldn't make out any features from that distance. But I knew it was staring straight at me. I froze. One detail that gives me the creeps is that its arms were crossed over its chest, hands clutching its shoulders. I took a photo as evidence, even though I was scared out of my mind. I kept staring at it, finishing my whiz silently. I considered getting my rifle, but I'd left it in the booth with my battle knife and axe. I was weaponless, facing this towering humanoid. I decided to get the hell out of there, but not before taking that picture. I slowly walked back to the booth, grabbed the axe, and waited. I didn't grab the rifle because in Finland, carrying ammo is prohibited even for guardsmen in a shooting camp. The The risk of an armed hostile is minimal, and a gun alone is usually enough. But what I saw wasn't human. I sat there, axe in hand, ready to defend myself, but the creature never came. The last few minutes of my shift were absolutely silent. When my shift ended, I immediately woke my buddy and told him. He was so tired he barely registered it. I just wanted to rest and not set foot outside that booth again. My heart was pounding, but I eventually fell asleep. My sleep didn't last long. I woke up before my next shift to the sound of footsteps outside. I thought it was my friend, but he was asleep. Someone or something else was out there. I lay still, terrified. This went on for a minute, then I heard a sudden howl. It sounded like wind at first, but there was no wind. This howl was long and high-pitched, almost a moan, and it froze me in terror. After the howl, the footsteps continued before fading away. Whatever it was gone. Against all odds, I fell back asleep and was woken by my friend for his shift. I told him everything again. He laughed at first, but his expression turned serious when I showed him the photo. We went outside, and I showed him the spot. He was quiet. I took a second photo for comparison. He walked to where the creature stood. My friend is 194 centimeters, about 6 feet 4 inches, and he came nowhere near the height of that thing, further proving I hadn't dreamt it. I brought this to my superiors and friends, and no one could explain it. Some suggested a prank, but no one could be that tall, stay that still, or be in the forbidden south side of the booth. The footsteps and howl also confirmed it wasn't a prank. To this day, I have no idea what I saw or heard. Before this, I was a skeptic, but now with actual proof, I don't know what to believe. My friend Jay lives about 10 minutes from me in Florida. One morning, while it was still dark, her bus drove by a creepy area to pick up a kid. All the kids and the driver saw a weird-ass deer running alongside the bus. It looked like a humanoid deer with awkwardly bent limbs and freaky eyes. Jay didn't know anything about skinwalkers, so when she described it, I got chills. I tried to be rational, thinking maybe it was just a regular deer in the dark. But Jay swore it wasn't normal. Everyone saw it, and the bus driver even slowed down. It eventually ran off. When I asked her if she knew what skinwalkers were, she had no idea. After I Googled it and showed her the description, she said, "Yeah, that's what I saw, except it had the head of a deer." She kept insisting it looked neither like an animal nor a human. The kid from that bus stop never came back, though she wasn't sure if that was related. What she said reminded me of my own experience a couple of years before. One night, around 3 a.m., I was in my backyard, chilling in the silence, when I heard a really freaky-ass echoing scream from far away. I can only describe it as a woman and a cat trapped in a bag, screaming like they were being murdered. I've looked up mountain lion, fox, and owl mating calls, but this sounded nothing like them. It didn't sound animal or human. It sounded unnatural and weird. At first, I was unfazed, thinking it was a woman being attacked. But then the thing traveled incredibly fast, going from miles away to my neighborhood in under 5 seconds, and the closer it got, the more unnatural it sounded. When I stood up to leave, the scream just dead as stopped. I walked calmly inside, locked the doors, and then the scream started again, far away. I've also heard scraping and tapping on my windows some nights, usually between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. One night, while working on a project, I heard scraping against the bathroom door that led to the backyard. Through the blurry glass panels, I thought I saw something pointy and ash-gray scraping. I whispered, "What are you doing?" and it stopped. Then I heard walking by my bedroom window. Other nights, there would be footsteps and taps, but no one there. Another night, around 3 a.m., I was on my trampoline in the backyard. It became absolutely quiet, an uneasy silence, and I felt a dreadful sensation of being watched. I snapped my head left and caught a glimpse of a humanoid dark figure ducking under my fence. This thing was pure black, like the street light didn't hit it at all, almost cartoony, as if physics didn't apply to it. In my psychology class, I shared these stories. Many kids in my area, 5 to 15 minutes away, went crazy screaming that they'd experienced similar things. One girl heard tapping on her window and screaming, describing it exactly as I did, like a woman or cat but not quite. Another friend saw dark figures in the woods and heard the screaming too. Pretty much everyone had heard the same screaming at completely different times. We all agreed our town was haunted as hell. My coworker, a spiritual guy who has visions, also saw and heard the same things. He believes they're doing dark magic in the woods because he dreamed of hooded figures sacrificing a woman and a cat. Behind our local park, there's a shifty patch of woods with a huge, crooked cross made of nailed-together wood and rope, where I always feel uneasy. My coworker also saw humanoid figures that looked directly at him. We no longer mess around in those woods. I embarked on an expedition deep within the High Peaks wilderness in the Adirondacks with my buddy, Trailmaster, and my friend, Nymph. After hiking for most of the day, we found a good spot to camp. I was setting up tents while Trailmaster gathered wood and Nymph collected water. Suddenly, Nymph came running back to camp, panting and collapsing. I knew Nymph, and this was unusual. She told us she was filling up water at the creek when she heard a twig snap. She brushed it off as an animal, but then heard it again, louder and closer. Instinctively, she looked. She heard an audible grunting sound, like a male white-tailed deer. A feeling of dread washed over her, like she shouldn't be there, and she felt watched. She backed up and then saw, across the creek, obstructed by trees, only a tall pair of antlers and what looked like legs, hind legs, followed by loud grunting. She thought it could be a deer, but her gut told her, what deer isn't afraid of humans being so close? She ran back to camp, the grunts growing louder and more threatening. Trailmaster was skeptical, saying it was most likely a deer, but I gave Nymph the benefit of the doubt. Trailmaster went to investigate alone, as Nymph refused to go back. At the creek, Trailmaster found Nymph's footprints, and then, on the other side, prints resembling an animal, perhaps a deer, but with strange spacing, as if it had been walking on its hind legs. The prints formed a trail that emerged from the woods, stopped at the creek, and then turned back without overlapping. Trailmaster later admitted it spooked him, and he also felt uneasy. We set up camp, lit a fire, and decided one of us would stay awake all night. Our tents were close, and we set up a tripwire perimeter. Nymph was shaken. Trailmaster's findings made me uneasy, thinking about the darkness and silence. We kept seeing dark figures just beyond the firelight, and every rustle seemed like something sneaking up on us. I fell asleep on watch. Nymph woke around 4 a.m. to a putrid smell of rotting flesh filling the air, like an old, decomposing carcass. She woke us up. We hadn't smelled it before. We did a perimeter check and found nothing, but felt intensely watched. The smell faded within an hour. Only at first light 2 hours later did we notice it prints like a deer just a few meters away from camp. Trailmaster confirmed they were identical to the creek prints. They seemed to be missing a pair of legs, indicating a bipedal walk, and the zigzag pattern of the vertical prints was strikingly similar to how a human might walk. Trailmaster was tempted to follow them, but Nymph was hysterical, convinced the creature was stalking us. I urged Trailmaster to forget it. We needed to move. Nymph felt overwhelmed with dread all day, and Trailmaster, though he didn't feel the same, admitted she thought the creature was following us. We made it to our destination unharmed, and the feelings of dread vanished. It felt lighter, as if we had moved out of its territory. I'm not 100% sure what it was, but the name Wendigo comes to mind. I've been a skeptic until then. In 1984, on the southern Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia, I lived in a new house with my 2 young children. I don't drink alcohol or use drugs. nor did I believe in little people like fairies or gnomes. I'd recently developed a fear of flying, so before a trip to New Zealand, I took some tablets to calm my nerves. I slept through the flight and the drive home. My colleague dropped me off, did a quick check of the house, and left. My children were with a neighbor, and I looked forward to a rare night alone. I made tea, and with the front door open, security screen locked, I started unpacking. As I hung clothes in my bedroom wardrobe, I noticed the light seemed unusually bright and the atmosphere strange. Before I could think about it, an intense exhaustion overcame me, and I collapsed backwards onto my bed. I just lay there, then lost consciousness. The next thing I knew, I heard several argumentative voices telling each other to hurry. I managed to lift my head and saw several small people trying to pull me from the bed, feet first, towards the wardrobe. The wardrobe was only half a meter from the bed, and the left door was open. I'd hung clothes on the right, which meant both doors had been pushed left. Now they were trying to pull me into the left side, which would require both doors to be pushed right. It didn't occur to me at the time that the doors had been moved. I felt no shock or alarm. Instead, I thought I was too big and heavy for them to move quickly, and I had plenty of time to sleep. I now believe those thoughts were suggested to me. I must have lost consciousness again, because when I next woke up, I was lying with my head at the foot of the bed, surrounded by several people. They didn't speak. There were at least 6 or more, males and females. One male, larger than the rest, seemed to be their leader. He stared into my eyes with both of his, then shifted to just one eye. Something happened there, but I can't remember. I suspect he was imparting something to me. The creatures looked like typical gnomes or peasants from storybooks, about 2 to 3.5 feet tall. They were overdressed for the climate, with weathered, muddy-looking Caucasian skin, strong facial bones, and squash faces. Their bodies were stout and robust. I lost consciousness again. When I next saw them, they were in the center of the room, still looking at me. I still felt no fear, just looked at them. There seemed to be more of them now, with some younger, more nervous males. The women seemed to enjoy my predicament. I remember them as overworked, joyless, and not overly intelligent, as if I were just a job to them. Then I heard their quarreling voices again, urging each other to hurry. I raised my head, and to my alarm, I saw they had almost pulled my legs completely off the bed. My body was now upright, head against the headboard, feet near the wardrobe. A surge of adrenaline shot through me, and I realized they'd soon steer my falling body into the wardrobe. I yelled out, kicked at them, and jumped from the bed into the center of the room. The room seemed far too bright, and I stood there yelling at them, still not afraid, but angry. They muttered, looking resigned and bitter, then fled into the open half of the wardrobe, seeming to go and then down as if filing down a ramp. I stood watching them for a few seconds, then, with the lights still too bright, I left the room. The hallway was short, and as I walked towards the living room, I was suddenly consumed with sheer terror. There was no real reason for it, and I suspect that when the creatures left, they removed whatever calming influence they'd subjected me to. I called my colleague, then stumbled out of the house into the middle of the road, moaning for help. I was like a small child, completely consumed by horror. My colleague returned, drove me to his house, and I got into bed, freezing from shock. I wouldn't let him leave the room or turn off the light. When I woke, he was gone. He wouldn't discuss it, but he did say he'd never seen anyone as terrified as I had been. We married the following year, but never spoke of it again. He later confirmed the entire experience had lasted no more than 15 minutes. In 2004, I tried to find similar accounts and only found one mention in a book by Jenny Randalls, stating 7% of aliens were described as looking like gnomes. I submitted my account to a UFO research group in Queensland. They had no other records of gnome-like entities. Weeks later, they contacted me, astounded. The day before, a woman in Melbourne had called them, hysterical, claiming gnome-type creatures had been running through her house for hours. This was before their magazine with my story was even printed or distributed. The Melbourne woman refused contact, which the group said was common for people afraid of ridicule. My account was published, but no one else came forward. About 5 years ago, my best friend Devin and I, both 35, went on a hunting trip. Our wives were doing their own thing with the kids. We set up camp and were planning for the next day, hoping for a better hunt than our last uneventful one. Then we noticed a strange sound in the distance, a very low, almost magnetic hum. We both stopped talking and looked at the sky, but saw only stars in our campfire. The sound was real but hard to pinpoint. It bothered us, so we decided it must be some weird animal and went to sleep. A few hours later, the sound changed, becoming more powerful. I swore I saw bright lights flashing over my tent. Thinking Devin was messing with me, I opened my tent and looked around. There were lights coming from above, and I could see some sort of object floating just above, the source of the strange noise, now louder than ever. I don't remember anything after that, just passing out. I woke up in the morning long past when I should have. My phone alarm hadn't gone off. Our campfire was out. Devin wasn't in his tent. I poked around, called his name, but no reply. I was scared, thinking he'd started the hunt without me. I looked in his tent again and found his gear, but his sleeping bag was completely empty. I tried to ignore my fear, assuming he'd gone to the toilet and called his name into the wilderness. No reply. After sitting there for what felt like hours, absolutely terrified that he'd died, I left camp, sending him a text. I initiated search and rescue procedures. The weirdest thing happened when I called my wife and told her he was missing. She didn't know who I was talking about. I told her he was my best friend, but she got angry, saying I was wasting her time, sounding drunk or high. I was beyond pissed. I found Devin's wife's number and called her. She didn't pick up. I texted her, and a few hours later she replied, "Who is this?" What the hell was going on? They never found his body. They never found anything. When I got home, everyone acted like I was insane. I learned to drop the subject. It was like that night, Devin had been erased from reality. Every trace of him, his wife, his family, whom I'd supposedly never met, my mom not knowing him, all our childhood photos was gone, electronically and physically. He didn't exist, and I was the only person who remembered him. Had I gone insane? Some people think I fell on a rock and imagined it all. Devin, buddy, if you're out there, send me a sign. I think I'm losing my mind. Around fall 2006, I grew up in a rural part of Ohio with dense woods behind my house. I loved exploring them, especially my favorite climbing tree, where I'd perch and listen to nature. One day, after watching the sunset, I began my descent. When my feet touched the ground, I heard my mother's familiar voice calling my name. This was normal, but then I realized something strange. Her voice was coming from behind me, deeper in the woods, not from the entrance where she always stood. My mother had never entered these woods with me. I was eager to show her my favorite spots, but something felt off. She kept calling my name, but her voice sounded frantic, almost angry. Fearing I was in trouble, I froze. I squinted, trying to locate her, but saw no one. Suddenly, I heard her voice calling my name from the direction of my house, sounding much calmer. Seconds later, the voice from deeper in the woods screamed, "Come here right now." It wasn't an echo. I was hearing two distinct voices. My legs turned to jelly. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. The voice that I originally thought was my mother's was drawing closer. There was something unnerving about it. Terrified of what I'd see, I turned and ran towards the exit of the woods as fast as I could. The woods had never seemed larger. Behind me, the voice continued to call my name, now sounding desperate. Panic set in as my actual mother finally came into view, waiting patiently. I refused to look back. The moment I stepped out of the woods and into the backyard next to my mother, The other voice suddenly stopped, rather than fading away. My mother asked what was wrong. After we were safely inside, I asked her if she had entered the woods. Confused, she said no. I then hesitantly asked if she had heard anyone else calling my name or yelling. Her answer was no. I explained everything. She was surprised but nonchalant, saying I must have imagined it and spent too much time alone. The incident has stayed with me. I can still hear that voice, exactly like my mother's, but I know it wasn't her. Not only was she waiting outside, but the voice also sounded strangely off in a way I can't fully explain. I didn't go back into those woods often until I was 17. I considered every explanation, but none seemed plausible. It wasn't my mother playing a prank, nor could it have been a neighbor, as we lived in a rural area and they wouldn't know my name or where to find me. My best explanation is a doppelganger or a demon. In Mexico, my aunt and grandma always told us stories about people getting paralyzed by coyotes in the hills and about wearing coyote hairs for magic. My mom and others were followed by large black dogs or had their paths blocked. Grandma put scissors in a cross shape above our doorway to keep witches away. People talked about an Indian in the hills and witches that cartel members hired to curse enemies, even kidnapping kids as payment. Near our village was an abandoned mine, a popular hiking spot. One night, my uncle and I hiked through the hills, past a lake and an oasis. We started at 11 p.m. and got home at 7 a.m. Nothing happened that night. That was the last year I saw my uncle as I used to. The following year, he was the town's laughing stock, a drunk, skin and bones, teeth falling out, weak and shaky. He'd been respected, but now even his brothers looked down on him. Just a year prior, he was at his peak when we went on that 8-hour hike. The moon was full, illuminating everything. I asked him what we'd do if we saw a coyote. He joked about coyote hairs bringing luck with ladies, then said they're more scared of us. I'll skip to around 3 a.m. as we near the mine. We had 2 German shepherds with us. One, Lucy, had gone ahead, as they often did. We saw a big white owl flying overhead, and my uncle joked it was a witch. Tambo, the other dog, wouldn't stop growling at it, just like he had at a rattlesnake earlier. I had an uneasy feeling. I told my uncle I'd check if the mine was flooded while he looked for Lucy. Inside, it was eerily silent, no bats chirping. I wanted to reach the writing on the walls, but a quarter of the way in, I thought it was flooded. My shoes got wet and were squeaking as I walked. This next part sent shivers down my spine. When I turned to head back, my flashlight began dimming prematurely. I stopped walking, but I could still hear shoes squeaking, coming from behind me, from one of the forked paths. It was the exact squishy, rubbery sound my shoes were making. I froze. It was getting closer. Then I heard someone say, "Tambo," in an almost mocking, unnatural way. I flashed my flashlight towards the sound, panicked. All I had was a slingshot. I grabbed it, ready to fling it, but had no rock. I can't describe what I saw. It looked like a tall blur with a smile, moving jerkily. It might have had yellow eyes, or it could have been the flashlight reflection. It looked like an out-of-focus person. I threw my slingshot, and it made a screeching tire noise. I ran and ran, twisting my ankles, not looking back. Outside, Tambo was growling at me, then at the mine entrance. I ran past him. Tambo started following me, whimpering. I was tearing up, thinking we were going to die 3 hours from anyone. I just wanted my uncle. I felt like he could take down anything. I saw him about 50 feet away, kneeling. His rifle was on his back, shining in the moonlight. When I reached him, he was crying, knelt over Lucy's body. Lucy had a knife stuck in her. He said he found her like that. I turned my back to him, looking around constantly. Tambo was licking Lucy's body, sounding like he was crying. He was completely silent, but then we heard coyotes howling all around us. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Once the howling stopped, my uncle put Lucy's body in a crevice. He looked on edge too, constantly looking over his shoulder. We started making our way home, not saying a single word. I didn't tell him what I saw until much later. In Mexican culture, the dead and spirits are a big part of life. My grandma said she saw the devil himself in the 1940s, a figure on horseback in the pitch dark. She also saw the weeping woman, La Llorona, half white, half shadow, floating down a dirt road without legs, crying. My mother told me stories of duendes, gnomes, and ollies, shapeshifters. Her sister saw a little child dart under her bed, but it wasn't her son, and it couldn't have been her newborn daughter. Gnomes are believed to take the souls of children. My father, as a child, saw naked children in a tree calling him to climb up, but his grandma, knowing it was gnomes, kept him inside. Another time, his baby cousin died, and they found marks on her neck as if she had been strangled by an unseen force. My mother's father and his neighbor were enemies, and the neighbor was rumored to be a Nahual. Later, a book of spells and witchcraft with Noah-related entries was found in his house. My mother also saw a faceless silhouette of a Mexican revolutionary soldier who was said to have been executed in that spot. This happened to me on the 27th of October this year. For some context, I'm a 19-year-old male who is currently working in the Finnish military, as it is mandatory for everyone over 18 years old. In late October, our company had a shooting camp. Pretty average stuff. We go to a shooting area, train for a week doing different kinds of shooting exercises, and then return to the brigade. This one was no different, except during this particular camp, we put a few guardsmen on some major roads leading to the area to make sure no unauthorized people would enter the dangerous zone. This guardsman job was actually a real blast, since if you were chosen to do it, you were put to a booth that had heating, a bunk, electricity, a fridge, and all sorts of other luxuries that other troops could only dream of while lying in their tents. Well, on Friday evening of the 27th, I almost couldn't contain my joy when I heard that I would be the one getting the last guardsman shift on the guard booth. I would guard the place from the moment I arrived there until the next morning when someone would come and pick me up and we would leave. I got one battle buddy with me to do the booth so we could do shifts, allowing the other to sleep while the other guards. We arrived at the booth. It was late evening already, so my buddy and I just laid down our gear, heated up the booth, and decided on our shifts. My buddy was to guard from 7 p.m. till 11 p.m., and I would continue to do it from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., and then we would switch again, and so on. I could have gone to sleep immediately, but I decided to keep my buddy company since I didn't feel tired. We ended up chatting the whole 4 hours about life and stuff. You know, the usual thing young guys talk about. The time basically flew while we chatted, and no cars passed through the booth during the whole time. Finally, my buddy's shift ended, and my shift started. He said he was tired and went to sleep immediately, so I took my place as guardsman and continued alone. At this point, it would be wise to tell you a little bit about the place we were in. The shooting area itself was dozens of kilometers in diameter and pretty secluded, so no civilians usually bothered to come, even by accident. The booth itself was located about 5 kilometers from our campsite, so my buddy and I were pretty much isolated from everyone and everything. The only form of communication we had was a radio that we could use to contact the security major if something were to happen. The place we had to guard was an X-shaped junction, one road going from north to south and the other from west to east. Everything south of the booth was off limits to everyone who didn't have direct acceptance from the security major to enter, since it was dangerous because of the shootings and explosions that we practiced there. Now back to my shift. The 4 hours I had to sit there in complete silence felt much longer than the 4 hours I had chatted with my friend, obviously, but I didn't complain. I actually quite enjoyed it, looking at the snow-covered roads and forests lit dimly by one single street lamp and the crescent moon from the cloudless sky. It was literally a perfect night for ghosts and monsters. There was no wind, no sound at all, and no cars passing during my whole shift. I loved it. I've always liked being alone and loved silence. On top of that, I also liked everything creepy, so I kept myself entertained imagining all kinds of scary beings lurking in the forest beyond the reach of the streetlight. Not that I believed any of it, though. But I had to admit that each time I stepped out of the booth, I got this feeling of being watched. You know, the one that makes your neck tingle and the hair stand up on the back of your neck. I didn't mind it, though. It was normal. I was a guardsman in the middle of nowhere, basically alone in the middle of the night. It was normal to be a little paranoid, though there would be nothing to fear in the forest. I've lived my whole life near them and know really well what lies within them and what is not. That's how I kept my imagination from running too wild. Hours passed, and my shift was nearing its end. I looked at my phone and decided that soon it would be time to wake up my buddy, but before doing that, I would go out and take a whiz. I didn't want to go to sleep and then wake up minutes later with the urge to pee. So that's what I did. I stepped out, walked behind the booth, and started doing what I came to do. All was peaceful. I had already started to plan what I was going to do on my next vacation when I happened to lift my gaze from the ground and took a quick glance at my surroundings. As soon as I looked to my left, directly to the south of the booth, my heart skipped a beat and my stomach grew cold. Just a mere 20 to 30 meters away from me, in the forest, just barely lit by the street light, something was standing. It clearly looked human, but the sheer size of the thing assured me that it was not. The thing had to be at least 3 meters tall. It wasn't in any way strangely shaped. It looked perfectly human, but it was just huge. By the looks of it, it was wearing a long green robe-like clothing, like a sniper's ghillie suit. Its face was pale, but I could not make out any facial features. It was too far away for that. But I could tell that it was staring straight at me, and I was standing absolutely still. I didn't move a muscle, nor did I make the slightest sound. That in particular gives me the creeps for some reason. One curious detail that I also noticed was that it was crossing its arms over its chest so that its hands were clutching its shoulders. That's the best way I can describe what I saw. And usually when I tell people this story, they dismiss it, and I tell them what I saw and then I show them the evidence. I took a photo of the creature I saw. I may have been scared out of my mind, but I was still a guardsman, and my duty was to document everything that happened. After I had recovered from my initial shock of seeing this thing, I just continued staring at it while silently finishing taking a whiz. I pulled my pants up, closed them, and thought of what I would do next. The obvious answer was to pull out my rifle and confront it, but my careless self had decided to leave it in the booth together with my battle knife and axe. I was without a weapon, face to face against this towering behemoth of a humanoid. I weighed my options and decided to get the hell out of there, but not before I took that picture. After I had done that, I slowly turned around and walked to the booth. I sat in my chair, grabbed the axe, and waited. Now you may ask why I didn't grab the assault rifle. The answer is because this isn't the USA, this is Finland, and even though we are in a military shooting camp, carrying ammo with you is prohibited even for a guardsman. That's because here, average citizens can't just carry a loaded gun with them wherever they please. So having ammo with us when the risk of running into a hostile armed person is really minimal would just be another safety risk. Usually, just the sight of a gun, let alone an assault rifle, is enough to scare violent people into calming down. But what I had seen was no human. It couldn't have been. So now I just sat in my booth holding my axe, ready to defend myself if the creature came, but it never did. The last couple of dozen minutes of my shift went absolutely silent. When my shift ended, I immediately woke up my buddy and told him what I'd seen, but apparently he was so tired he really did not register what I had just told him. I, however, didn't care. The only thing I cared for was that I wouldn't set foot outside that booth again that night, and it was my turn to rest, so I lay down, heart still pounding from the stress, and tried to fall asleep. Needless to say, it was pretty difficult after what I had seen, but eventually I fell asleep since it was quiet and peaceful again. Though my sleep didn't last long, I woke up before my next shift had even started, to the sound of footsteps coming from the outside of the booth. I thought that it must just be my friend carrying firewood from the outside, until I realized that he had fallen asleep in front of the guard desk. There was someone or something outside the booth that didn't belong there, someone that I feared I had seen earlier. I just lay there, heart pounding. I was not going to stand to see what was on the outside. This went on for a minute until I heard a sudden howl. At first, it sounded like the wind blowing through the cracks on the wall, but then I remembered there was no wind. This howl was long and high-pitched, almost like a moan. It made my whole body freeze from terror. I had never been this scared in my life. After the howl ended, the footsteps continued for a while until they faded too. Whatever had been on the outside was now finally gone, hopefully. Against all odds, I managed to fall back asleep and was awoken up in the morning by my friend whose next shift had started. I immediately remembered what happened the last night and told my friend. At first, he didn't believe me but laughed a little, but his expression grew serious once I showed him the picture I took. When we went outside and I showed him the place where I had taken the photo, he was quiet while we stood there. I took a second photo for comparison. My friend then walked to the spot where the creature had stood when I saw it. My friend was about 194 centimeters tall, and he came nowhere near close to the height of this thing, further proving to myself that I had not dreamt it at all. Sadly, I don't have a picture of my friend standing in the same spot. I didn't think of it at the time. After that, I brought this case to the attention of my superiors and other friends, and they were all as confused as I was. No one seemed to be able to explain what I had seen. Someone suggested that it could be a prank pulled by the other troops. I thought about it but refused the possibility. There was no way some guys would bother walking many kilometers into the dead of night just to scare some random guardsmen. Besides, even if they did, why would they be standing south of the booth where it was forbidden for anyone to enter? If I wanted to scare the guardsmen, I would go to the north side of the booth where I would be detected eventually for sure. But the fact that confirms that it couldn't have been some random troops playing a prank was the sheer size of it. Even two people standing on top of each other could hardly match the scale of this thing, let alone stay so still. And then there were the footsteps and the howl. To this day, I have no idea what I saw and heard that night. Was it some troop playing a prank, some abnormally huge civilian having a long night walk in the middle of nature, or something that science cannot explain? Before this event, I'd always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to the paranormal. I like to believe, but it's hard without any concrete evidence. But now, when I had seen something myself and even got proof of it, I don't know what to believe anymore. So the Groff man, or whatever you may have been, I hope I someday find the truth about you. Okay, so my first story is actually my friend's story. During the time these things took place, we were all high school students. This is all happening in Florida, by the way. I already knew about skinwalkers and the like, but when these things happened to me, I wasn't sure if it really was a skinwalker or something else. I've noticed that most of the people who tell me they've experienced the same phenomenon live in the area that I do, and my friend is no exception. My friend is called Jay and lives about 10 minutes away from me. She told me that on her bus, there's this one area they drive by to drop this kid off. She said she doesn't know why, but it gives her the creeps. Well, she told me that one early morning, so it was still dark outside, when they were driving in that area to pick him up, all the kids in the bus and the driver saw this weirdest deer running along the bus. It didn't run away from the bus, but ran beside it. She said it looked weird as hell. You all know the usual stuff, it looking like some humanoid deer because it just didn't look right, like its limbs were bent in an awkward way. And she said its eyes were freaky. The thing is, my friend didn't know jack about skinwalkers or any of that mumbo-jumbo, so I basically got the chills. I tried being reasonable because I thought that perhaps she'd just seen a regular deer, and since it was dark, there was a possibility that she got confused. Besides, it's Florida. I don't think we're even supposed to get that kind of stuff down here. However, Jay swore up and down that it wasn't like a normal deer. She said that they all saw it, and the bus driver even slowed down to get a better look because everyone was weirded out by it, and it was basically pandemonium. After a while, it ran off and disappeared. Jay couldn't have made something like this up, because like I said before, she doesn't even know anything about skinwalkers or the goat man, or whatever it could be. So anyway, I got freaked out here because I'm knowing about these things and my friend is clueless, thinking she's just telling a regular story about some freaky deer demon. So I asked her, "Do you know what skinwalkers are?" And she looked at me and said, "What is that?" I googled them and showed her the description, and she goes, "Yeah, that's what I saw, except it had the head of a deer." She kept on saying it didn't look like an animal or a human. After a while, the kid from that bus stop didn't come back, although that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this unless you want to go wild with what might have happened to him. So we were freaking out together because what she said reminded me a lot about what I heard one night about it not being animal or human. See, a couple of years before she told me this story, I found myself one night in the backyard, like really early, perhaps 3 o'clock in the morning or so, because I was thinking about things due to personal reasons. I was just kind of chilling and enjoying the silence when all of a sudden I hear this really freaky-ass echoing scream from really far away. The only way I can describe it is as if a woman and a cat were trapped together inside of a bag and screaming like they were about to get murdered. I know mountain lions, foxes, and owls can make the weirdest mating sounds, and I've looked this stuff up trying to debunk it myself, but it just didn't sound anything like those things. You usually would be able to tell if it's an animal, right? It's just common sense. Like my friend said before, all that didn't sound animal or human. It sounded unnatural and weird. Now, me being me, I was pretty unfazed at first, a little concerned. Yeah, but at first it was really too far away, and I just assumed it was a woman, and I actually thought that they were killing people in the streets at 3 o'clock in the morning. The thing is, that thing traveled fast. It was freaky as hell, and the closer it got, the more weird and unnatural it sounded. It only took me a couple of seconds to realize that this was no woman and that it was no cat, because while this was going down, I was going through in my head, what the hell is that? This thing went from sounding like it was a couple miles away to being in my damn neighborhood in under 5 seconds. It was weird because 1 second it was so far and the next it was right on my street. I almost soiled myself. The second I stood up to leave, the scream had just stopped. Like it just dead as stopped, and I'm really thinking at this point it's in front of my house. So I walked as calmly as possible back inside, locked the doors, and the scream was back to being far away again. Weird as hell. I've also heard scraping and tapping on my windows some nights, usually around the same time. I'd say 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, and I've seen dark figures that weren't affected by light outside of my house. To add detail to these things so that you can get a feel for it, basically what happened is that I was doing a project for class, and since I procrastinate like a pro, I'm up till 2 a.m. I go to wash my hands from all the graphite, and as the water is running, I hear scraping against one of the bathroom doors that leads to the backyard. Now, most of the door is made up of these glass panels that kind of make everything look like a bunch of blurry gloops if you try and look out of it. And for a split second, I thought I noticed something pointy and ash gray scraping against the window. It almost looked ghost-like. I turned off the water and waited a little bit, and it comes back to scraping against the window again. I'm trying not to freak out, but my hands are shaking. It's stupid, but I actually whispered, "What are you doing?" while my voice trembled. It stopped, and I didn't hear anything except what sounded like someone walking by the window in my room. Every now and then it continued that way for some nights too, off and on. I would hear footsteps by my window, and even a tap or two some nights as well. Sometimes I just ignored them, and other times I looked out to see if someone was there, but there never was anyone. Another night, I had been outside in my backyard again after having a rough day. It was maybe 3 o'clock or so in the morning, and I'm sitting outside on the trampoline, just relaxing. I suddenly notice it's absolutely quiet, like the kind of uneasy silence that almost feels like a vacuum. I get this kind of dread, like I'm being watched, and I snap my head to my left to catch a glimpse of a humanoid dark figure ducking under the other side of my fence. Immediately, I'm a little freaked out because I noticed this thing was pure black, like the street light nearby didn't hit it at all. Almost like it looked cartoony, if that makes sense, because it was like the law of physics didn't need to apply for this thing. See, the reason I'm ranting about this stuff is because I told both of my friends and my own story in my psychology class at the same school. A lot of these kids live around my area, about 5 to 15 minutes away max, and they all started screaming at the entire class. And they all went crazy when I finished because apparently they've all experienced similar things. One girl told me that she also heard tapping on her window at night and heard screaming. It freaked me out because she explained it in the same way I did. She said it sounded like a woman or a cat, but not really like either. Another one of my friends who lives really close told me she saw dark figures in the woods and heard the screaming too. Pretty much everyone has heard the screaming. It sounded the same. That's the thing, in completely different time frames. That's what's weird because everyone's voice sounds different, so how could she be describing the same thing I did? You all know, like, if people were really killing each other out there, none of us thought it was an animal either. We all agreed from that point on that our town was haunted as hell. But I don't know, if there are any animals out there that sound like that. I want to know because that didn't sound like anything I'd heard before, so I want to be enlightened. The only person I've ever heard who's seen anything remotely specific is the first friend from my aunt who went on the bus, and apparently it's really bad to talk about skinwalkers, and even worse if you see them. It's like bad mojo. Those things are said to be able to travel very quickly, so thinking about that made it seem like what we experienced was a skinwalker. But to be honest, I hope there's a logical explanation that I'm not aware of. Today, I asked my coworker, who is also a friend in high school and lives nearby too. He got all spooked and said that he'd seen and heard the same things. He's very spiritual and often has visions. He told me that he believes they're doing dark magic in the woods because of a dream that he had about some hooded figures sacrificing a woman and a cat or something like that, which is freaky because it also turns out that behind our local park, there's a patch of woods which is very shifty. I was shown this by an acquaintance during my freshman year who lives a couple of streets away. Down the path in the woods, after some walking, there's this huge cross smack dab in the middle of the woods. It's basically raw, crooked, nailed together into a cross with rope hanging from where you put your hands if you were getting crucified. It's huge too, and whenever I decide to check it out, I always feel uneasy, like this feeling that if I stay for too long, something bad will happen. It doesn't look like a grave, to be honest, but who knows? Anyway, he says I'm not the first person that he knows who's told him about experiencing these things. He also had his own experiences with humanoid figures. He says he once saw one and that it turned and looked at him directly in the eye, as if it immediately knew he was looking at it. So, basically, we no longer mess around in the woods. Something about being in the woods has always fascinated me. I found myself on an expedition deep within the forest, to be more precise, High Peaks Wilderness, which is an area within the Adirondacks. I brought along a buddy of mine, but you can call him Trail Master, and a friend of mine whom we refer to as Nymph. The trails here are endless, beautiful mountain ranges filled with mile after mile of dense forest, a true definition of beautiful and dangerous. After hiking for most of the day, we must have traveled under 3.5 miles. Trail Master found a good spot for us to settle down for the night. A slight breeze blew from the northeast as the sun was on the verge of setting. We estimated 2.5 hours of daylight remaining. Trail Master went out to gather wood, and Nymph went to collect water from a nearby creek. I worked on setting up our 3 tents for the night. All of a sudden, Nymph came running back to camp without the canteens. The sound of her panting, followed by her dropping to the dirt on her knees, was enough to leave me in awe. Believe me when I say I know Nymph. It's unusual for her to be panting that loud. Nymph. I did my best to calm her down, trying to get answers. What's the matter? I asked her just as Trail Master returned with a bundle of sticks. What's wrong with her? He asked. This is what Nymph told us. She had just arrived at the creek and found a good spot. She was just filling up, and the cliché sound of a twig snapping was what she heard. The sound wasn't enough to startle her, but rather the events that followed. The sound originated from the other side of the creek. She brushed it aside as an animal probably spooked by her presence and kept filling. Then she heard it again, except the sound was louder and seemed much closer this time. It caught her by surprise, and she was forced by instinct to look at the direction that the sound came from. What she heard next was an audible grunting sound, the type a white-tailed male deer might make. The feeling of dread washed upon her. She felt as though she shouldn't have been there, followed by the sudden feeling of being watched. It made her extremely uncomfortable, almost to the point of disorientation. She rose to her feet, took a few steps back, and what she then saw across the creek, obstructed by trees, was only a tall pair of antlers and what looked like legs, hind legs, followed by loud grunting. She thought it could have been a deer, but her better judgment kicked in, and she thought to herself, what deer isn't afraid of humans being so close? She ran back to camp, where the grunts became louder and started sounding almost threatening. "Are you sure?" Trail Master asked with a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Nymph didn't even answer him. Instead, she shot him a cold stare. "It was most likely a deer." "Are you afraid of deer?" said Trail Master. I, on the other hand, gave Nymph the benefit of the doubt. Nymph, even in her current state, was capable of describing what she saw, heard, and felt. It was her senses and a gut feeling that made her run away. Trail Master opted to go look into the area where Nymph had previously been. Nymph was reluctant and said she would not be going back, so Trail Master set out alone. Nymph stayed at camp with myself, who was debating on whether we needed to relocate our camp. I needed a report before the decision could be made. When Trail Master arrived at the area of the creek where Nymph had been, this is what he observed. Footprints, which were most likely Nymph's, heading in the direction of our camp, empty canteens on the ground. And on the other side of the creek, there were prints resembling an animal, perhaps a deer. The only problem was the spacing of the prints and how something about them appeared missing. A deer typically walks on all fours. Upon closer inspection, Trail Master came up with a conclusion that this deer had probably been walking on its hind legs. The prints formed a trail. The trail seemed to have emerged from somewhere in the woods, continued for a few meters, and stopped at the opposite edge of the creek, then turned around and headed back in the direction from where they originated from, without overlapping the original set. Trail Master later admitted that it did spook him, and he too had had this uneasy feeling. He arrived back at camp half an hour later with our filled canteens. Even if we wanted to move, it would be nearly impossible as the sun had already begun to set fast. Fast forward 2.5 hours, our tents were pitched, campfire lit, and dinner served. We decided that it was best for one of us to be awake at all times until first light. It was just too dark to move at the moment. My tent was only a foot away from Nymph's tent. There was a good reason for that. Trail Master's tent had been pitched a good 5 meters away because he was a light sleeper. We had to move his tent back closer to ours. The perimeter of our camp was set with a tarp which would sound if someone tripped the wire, some tin cans and fishing line. Primitive but effective. Nymph didn't say much about the incident that night, and I don't blame her. She was still a bit shaken from the incident. Though I would keep us safe, Trail Master's findings at the creek only raised uncertainty. Thinking about what Nymph saw and what the Trail Master found made me uneasy. The darkness around us, followed by the eerie silence of the woods and the uncertainty of what was out there, was unsettling. The sound of burning wood was the only sound loud enough to distract us from sudden faint sounds in the distance. The mind can play tricks on you. That night, it seemed like a dark figure was always standing a few meters outside of our camp, beyond the reach of the fire's light. Every rustle in the bush was something trying to sneak up on us. Every sound had a source. It's those sounds that make a night in the woods so magical. Trail Master and Nymph were asleep. I was on watch. The sounds of crickets at night are nature's lullaby, which was on the verge of putting me to sleep when all of a sudden it stopped. I had fallen asleep while on watch. Nymph said that she had awoken sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 4 a.m. She found both myself and Trail Master out cold. The air outside the tent was filled with a putrid smell. She described it as rotting flesh that just seemed to linger, a week-old carcass already in the stages of decomposition. It was that bad. Nymph, alarmed by the smell, woke both of us up. We obviously had not smelled anything ourselves before. I did a perimeter check and found nothing unusual. We did feel as if we were being watched, which is an overwhelming feeling. The smell faded within the hour after we started making some noise. It was only during first light, about 2 hours later, did we notice it prints from what I assumed to be a deer just a few meters away. Trail Master confirmed that these prints were identical to the ones he had found by the creek yesterday. It could have just been a random deer in the night, Trail Master said. Though what I found unusual was the way the prints had seemed to pace back and forth horizontally, then head in a vertical direction. Trail Master said they seemed to be missing a pair again, meaning it was just hind legs from the looks of it. I have to agree because these prints seemed odd. The prints would definitely have a pair. What bothered us was the zigzag pattern of the vertical prints, which was strikingly similar to how a human might walk. Trail Master was tempted to follow the set of prints, which headed in another direction. Nymph was hysterical and had no intention of doing such things. She said that the whole ordeal just seemed odd and downright creepy. A deer creature, weird prints, and not to mention the stench. Was this thing stalking us? We had no intention to find out. I urged Trail Master to forget about it, that we needed to keep on moving. Third time's the charm, I told Trail Master, let's not be around for it. We were on the move for most of the day. Nymph still felt overwhelmed with dread, and Trail Master did not experience the same feelings, hence why he opted to go investigate the prints before. He seemed fine being on point. Nymph admitted how she thought the creature was following us. I told her to stay close. I don't know what made her think that, but I knew better than to doubt her. If the creature had been following us, it probably followed at a distance. Nothing would be more terrifying than to suddenly turn around and see a pair of antlers sticking out from a tree behind, or for one of us to be singled out in the middle of nowhere. This, despite all that happened, we managed to reach our destination unscathed. All seemed quiet, and all feelings of dread vanished, as well as the feeling of being watched. The atmosphere felt lighter as we moved out of the area. Perhaps we were in its territory, so it felt the need to make its presence known. We no longer felt threatened, and nothing else significant happened that's worth mentioning. Reflection, we got lucky on that trip. Perhaps the creature decided to spare us. Maybe it meant no harm. We simply don't know. So many questions with very few answers. I'm not 100% sure what it was that we encountered out there. The one name does come to mind the more I think about it, the Wendigo. I've heard stories about the existence of this creature from folklore. I managed to remain a skeptic until now. Whatever that creature was, I'd like to think that it's still out there, waiting for the next group of hikers who venture off the trail into the vast unknown. Be careful next time you're out there in the woods. I'm now in my late 60s. The experience I'll briefly relate here took place on the southern Gold Coast in Queensland in 1984. Our house was less than 10 years old, as were all the others in the area at the time. The event took place. I was divorced and lived in the house with my 2 young children. I am neither a drinker of alcohol nor a user of drugs. They have never been a part of my life. I had no interest in fairies, goblins, gnomes, elves, or the like, nor had I been reading about them or watching anything about them on TV. If asked if I believed in the little people, I would have unhesitatingly replied no. In 1984, I attended a seminar in New Zealand along with several dozen other Aussies. I had recently developed a fear of plane travel, although previously I'd enjoyed it. A local chemist whom I knew had given me 3 or 4 tablets to take an hour before departure to settle my nerves. I took one prior to our departure from New Zealand. Consequently, I slept from New Zealand to Sydney, where we changed planes, and I slept from Sydney to Brisbane and slept through the drive from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. The driver, a colleague, carried my suitcase into my home. He conducted a cursory check on the premises before departing. My children were all in the care of a neighbor. It was very rare to have a night to myself. Being well-rested and relaxed, I was looking forward to spending a few hours reading or watching TV. First, I made a cup of tea. The television was on. The front main door was open, but the security screen latch was locked. As I sipped the tea, I decided I may as well unpack. I carried an armload of clothes into my bedroom and hung them in my wardrobe. I noticed the light in the room seemed unusually bright. Something was strange about the atmosphere. I had no time to analyze it before I was overcome with exhaustion, so intense that I only had time to stagger backwards into bed. I lay face up on the bed. I was concerned my shoes might make a mark on the bedspread. I looked down to make sure only my heels were resting on the bedspread, and that was that. I lost consciousness. Next, I knew I could hear the sounds of several voices. They were argumentative voices that seemed to tell each other to hurry. I managed to lift my head and look down to the source of the voices. There were several small people. They were trying to pull me from the bed, feet first, and into the wardrobe. The wardrobe was only half a meter approximately from the foot of the bed, and I saw that the left-hand side of the wardrobe was open. The wardrobe had 2 sliding doors. I'd hung the clothes on the right-hand side, which had required both wardrobe doors to be pushed to the left. And now the little people were trying to pull me into the left-hand side, which would have required someone to push both doors to the right. I should explain here that during the event, I must have been operating similar to a video camera in that I saw and heard only, and what I saw and heard must have been committed to memory at the time. However, I did not experience normal thought processes. So what I remembered after and now is the product of my mental video camera. At the time, it did not dawn on me that the doors had been moved. I simply saw several small people trying to pull me from the bed and into the open half of the wardrobe. I experienced no shock or alarm. Instead, I told myself I had lots of time to continue sleeping because I was far too big and heavy for them to move very fast. Now I am of the opinion those thoughts were not my own, but were in some way suggested to me. Whatever the case, I must have lost consciousness again. Because the next thing I can remember is waking up to find several people crowded around me. They didn't speak as far as I know. I was now lying with my head at the foot of the bed, so my feet must have been at the head of the bed. Again, I was similar to a video camera. I have very clear memory of how these people appeared. There were males and females, I can't remember how many, but at least 6 or more. One, a male, was larger than the others and appeared to be their leader. He was closest to me. At first, he stared into my eyes with both of his. Then a blank, and his position had changed, and he was looking at me with only one of his eyes. Something happened there, but I can't remember. I suspect he was imparting something to me. The creatures appeared as the typical gnomes or peasants from storybooks. Based on the height of the bed, their height was perhaps 2 to 3.5 feet tall. They were overdressed. Their clothing was suited to a much colder climate. I can remember that in considerable detail, possibly because in those days I did a lot of home sewing. They were Caucasian. Their skin looked weathered, as if they worked outdoors a lot, and their skin had a muddy cast. They had strong facial bones, wide cheekbones, wide jaws, strong chins and noses. Their eyes and mouths were long horizontally, but vertically narrow and seemed recessed between the strong facial bones. The best way to describe their faces is as squashed, as if a heavy weight had been placed on top of their heads, squashing them downward. Their bodies were stout, robust, with deep-cut chests, broad waists, and strong shoulders. I couldn't see the bottom half too well, and I must have lost consciousness again. Because when I saw them next, I was still in the same position, but they were now in the center of the room looking at me. I looked back at them and still felt no fear nor alarm. I just looked at them, and they at me. I had no thought process at the time. There seemed to be more of them than before. Among them were a couple of younger males who seemed a bit more nervous or unsure. The other men were impassive. The women, however, seemed to enjoy my predicament. Based on my mental video recording, I later regarded them as overworked, joyless, and not over-intelligent. It seemed I was simply a job to them, and they seemed a bit nervous. Next, I was aware of their voices again, as before, quarreling, talking over the top of each other, and arguing to hurry. I raised my head, and to my alarm, I saw that they had almost succeeded in pulling my legs from the bed. My body was now right way up on the bed with my head against the head of the bed and my feet near the wardrobe. When I'd seen that they almost pulled all of my legs from the bed, a surge of adrenaline shot through me, and I grasped that it couldn't be much longer before gravity did the rest of the job for them. All they'd have to do would be to steer my falling body into the wardrobe. I yelled out and kicked at them. I jumped from the bed and into the center of the room. The room seemed far too bright, and I remember standing there yelling at them. I still wasn't afraid, I was angry. They muttered between themselves, and they looked and sounded resigned and bitter. Then they fled into the open half of the wardrobe. They seemed to go in, then down, as if filing down a ramp inside the wardrobe. I stood there watching them for probably a few seconds. Then, still with the light seeming far brighter than usual, I turned towards the only door and left the room. It was only a small house. The hallway was only 3 or 4 meters long, and I left the room, went through the hallway towards the living room, and that's when I became completely consumed with terror. Nothing happened between yelling at the creatures and making it towards the living room, but in those few seconds, I was overtaken by sheer horror, which seemed to escalate with every instant. I've never known a feeling like it, yet there was no real reason for it. I suspect now that when the creatures departed, they removed whatever calming influence they'd subjected me to during the ordeal itself. After phoning the colleague who dropped me off earlier that evening, I stumbled out of the house and into the middle of the road. I was desperate to be with someone and was moaning in the hopes that someone could come and rescue me. I was completely without shame and must have been reduced to the level of a small child. But I must stress that I wasn't afraid, consciously at least, that the little creatures would return and attack me. There wasn't a real focus for the terror. It just was horror feeding into more horror. Not long after, my colleague returned and drove me to his house. He didn't speak to me. I didn't care. I was just glad to be with someone and to be getting away from my house. When we arrived at his place, I got into bed but couldn't get warm. He put a pile of blankets on top of me, but I was still freezing. Now I realize I was in shock. I wouldn't let him leave the room or turn off the lights. I must have fallen asleep when I awoke. He wasn't there. Next morning, he wouldn't discuss any of it. I was anxious. He thought I'd gone insane and tried to explain what happened. He didn't want to talk about it, but he did say that he'd never seen anyone as terrified as I had been when he saw me in the road. We never discussed it again, despite that we married the following year. When I asked him how long had elapsed between when he dropped me off after our return from New Zealand and receiving my phone call asking to come and get me, it seemed the entire experience of the little people had been no more than 15 minutes. In approximately 2004, I decided to submit an account of the experience. In the 20 years which had elapsed, I had searched in the hopes of discovering others that had had similar experiences without success. There was no internet then, of course, so I was reliant on books. I found only one mention in a book by Jenny Randalls, who said 7% of aliens had been described as looking like gnomes. It was a relief to discover I was not alone in my experience, although I did not believe the creatures I'd seen to be extraterrestrial. When I decided in 2004 to leave a record of my experience somewhere, I didn't know where to submit it. Finally, I chose an organization which was a UFO research group in Queensland, the QLD Group. The QLD Research Group replied to say in response to my inquiry they'd had no record of anyone else having an experience with gnome-type entities. They asked if they could publish my account in their forthcoming magazine, and I replied that it was fine on the condition that my identity not be disclosed. Some weeks later, the research group got in touch with me. They were astounded by the latest developments. They said the day before, a woman in Melbourne had called them. She'd been close to hysterical and claimed that gnome-type creatures had been running through her house for a few hours. Her adult daughter was present at the time, and the woman wanted someone to go to her house to rid them of the gnomes. The Queensland UFO Research Group said they told the woman they'd contacted someone closer to her about the situation, which they did. Apparently, the QLD Group had contacted the Melbourne UFO Research Group and had given them the woman's contact info. In telling me this the following day, The research group said it was impossible for the Melbourne woman to have known about my experience because the QLD group magazine had been delivered to their printer hours before the Melbourne woman contacted them. In other words, the QLD magazine hadn't even been printed yet, let alone distributed. The group said they couldn't get over the coincidence, nor could they understand why both the Melbourne woman and I, as I live in Sydney, had contacted a group in Queensland. I said I had most probably contacted them because my own experience occurred in Queensland. I asked the group to forward me the details of the woman in Melbourne because I was eager to compare notes with her. She was the only other person I knew of who had experienced anything. But when the QLD group replied, it was to tell me that the Melbourne woman had told them she didn't want to be contacted, not by me or anyone else. The Queensland group told me this was often the case. They said people wanted help at the time, but once the situation was resolved or they'd calmed down, they become afraid their experience will be reported in the media. They're afraid they'll be subjected to ridicule generally, and particularly by those they know, such as neighbors and employers. My account was subsequently published in the magazine in hard copy and online. My identity had not been revealed, and I've been identified only as a C. Unfortunately, publication of my experience did not succeed in encouraging others to come forward. This happened to my friend Devin and me about 5 years ago. I don't want to release exactly where this occurred for the sake of anonymity. You see, Devin and I have been close friends since we were kids. I remember me and my mom and my friends all hanging out at the park and taking pictures when we were younger. He was like a second son to my mother. We grew up playing video games, eating junk food, staying up late, climbing out the windows and sneaking off into each other's houses, doing all those goofy things that kids do. We fought, made up, and have a long history of friendship. He was my best friend. We had spent all our childhood and teenage years together. We gotten into relationships and slowly drifted apart as our lives and priorities took hold. We were both about 35 when this happened. His wife Emma and my wife Jane were going to go do their own thing with the kids, and it was just a men's weekend for me and Devin. It was late in the night. We had already established our camp and were making a plan of where we were going to go next. We were quite familiar with the terrain, as we had hunted here before, and very excited for what tomorrow would bring and what we could possibly hunt. The last time we'd come out, our hunt was uneventful, and we returned home empty-handed. This pushed us further to aim to get something good. As we were discussing our plan, we noticed a strange sound off in the distance, sort of like a hum, very low hum, almost magnetic sounding, if that makes sense. We both, in unison, stopped talking and looked up into the sky where the sound was coming from. There was nothing but a blanket of stars and our pale firelight illuminating our small camp. We listened intently. The sound was still there and very real. However, we couldn't sense exactly where it was coming from. We were getting a bit put off, but continued making our plan. By the time we finished, it was still there. It was really bothering us. We agreed the best course of action would probably be to go to sleep. Perhaps we're just hearing things. It must be some strange animal we've never heard, we thought. Animals do make weird sounds. We both went to sleep in our individual tents and passed out. There's something, though, that bothered me, and a few hours later, the sound had changed. It was more powerful than before, and I swore I could see bright lights flashing over my tent. I thought he was messing with me, so in my sleepy haze, I opened the tent and looked around. Lights were coming from above, and I could see some sort of object floating just above. It was definitely the genesis of this strange noise, now louder than ever. All that I remember is passing out and waking up in the morning, far past the hour of which I should have awoken. My phone alarm didn't even go off. I wasn't sure what was happening then, so I picked myself up off the dirt and looked around. Our campfire had long extinguished. Then I looked over to Devin's tent. He wasn't in there. I poked around, shouted his name, but there was no reply anywhere. I was quite scared. Had he started the hunt without me? I looked into his tent one more time and found his gear stashed underneath his sleeping bag, which was empty. I opened it up all the way, and that was it. It was completely empty. The bag was nowhere to be seen. I tried putting my fear aside, assuming that he'd probably just gone to the toilet, so I shouted his name into the wilderness and received no reply. I found this very daunting, and I sat there for what felt like hours, and he didn't return. By this point, I was getting absolutely terrified that my friend had died in the wilderness, so I left the camp after sending him a text and started to leave. I did all the necessary proceedings regarding a search and rescue to try and getting him found, because I was incredibly concerned for my friend. The weird thing was, when I called my wife and told her he was missing, she didn't know who I was talking about. I told her that he was my best friend, and this wasn't a time to mess around, especially with him gone. Note, I omitted everything about the lights and the noise last night. She started getting angry at me, telling me that I was just wasting her time and not to work her up over nothing, and that I sounded drunk or high, and that I should come home now. I was beyond pissed. What was going on here? I looked through my phone and found the number of Devin's wife. I gave her a call, but she didn't pick up. I sent her a text asking if she'd heard from him, and a few hours later, I received a reply. Who is this? What the hell was going on? Safe to say, they never found his body. They never found anything. When I got home, everyone I spoke to was acting like I was going insane. I learned to drop the subject. I have no idea what's going on. It's like that night he was erased from reality. Every trace of him, his wife, who apparently we don't speak to and don't even know, his family I'd never met, my mom didn't even know who he was, and the pictures of him and I together as children I can no longer find, both electronically and physically. He doesn't exist, and I'm the only person that remembers him. Have I gone insane? Some people believe I fell on a rock. That's why I woke up that way and imagined this whole thing. But that can't be real, can it? Devin, buddy, if you're out there, send me a sign. I think I'm losing my mind.